when you're out there spraying, you're right. You're not just spraying like copious amounts of this liquid down. And a lot, when you boil it down to it, and you look at a lot of these labels on these chemicals, when you look, you have around 2 or 3% active ingredient, and the rest is inert. It's water blended with that salt is basically what you have when you have glyphosate. So, of that 24 ounces, 2 or 3% is active salt, and the rest is just inert.
Yeah, so here we are. We made it to episode 4. I say that every single podcast I've ever done is we've made it this far. But yeah.
It's hard to be diligent.
Yeah. What's been going on at the farm?
So it's been pretty busy there the last few days, and shorthanded today, so it makes it podcasting even more difficult. Mm-hmm. We had to squeeze one out in the afternoon to just get enough time, but here the last couple of days we've been going back and forth between corn and soybeans. I had a little bit of a combine issue on one of the heads on the bean header, and got that fixed, and we're drilling wheat at the farm, trying to seed a cover crop too, so spread fertilizer, just a little bit of everything going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of places we could go with that. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about spraying. We're talking about pesticides, herbicides, all that. I cannot say that word. Glyphosate, that one, is something you hear. It's a very buzzwordy thing. You hear the news say a lot about it. It's like, oh, they're putting this in your food, they're putting this in your food.
Trending topic on social media this morning.
Yeah.
Top 5 brands all saturated with glyphosate.
Yeah, well, they probably top 5 everything is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know too much about it. All I know is that we spray our food for a reason. Sure. Because weeds are bad. We burn things down so that you can actually harvest them before they turn into mold. So there's a lot of reasons that we do spray things. There's a lot of reasons we spray things the way we do. I don't know all those, so.
Yeah, and I know a lot about the pesticides we use on the farm. But I can't argue with somebody if they're going to say that at some level, if you spray it with whatever product you're spraying it, that it's going to show up. Glyphosate is a salt, so when it's applied, I guess the salt could be taken up by the plant, and I guess in a strong enough form, maybe it could affect you, but I don't. We do spray in low amounts, and we don't ever spray once the crops mature. Most of the time it's, I would guess that most bean applications, by the time the reproductive stages roll around, you do not want glyphosate on your plant anymore. So are we applying glyphosate to the fields early? Yes. And to the crop? Yes. But I'd say in very few circumstances, once the plant goes into a reproductive state, is it sprayed with glyphosate. Mm-hmm. So at that point, we're usually applying naturals or biologicals or like fungicides. So, and we're talking to maybe non-farmers here. So when we're talking about naturals or biologicals, you're talking about things like maybe growth hormones or sugars or elements like phosphorus or potassium, or when you're talking about fungicides, those are chemical compounds that affect fungus on plants. So glyphosate is used early to clear the fields like you were talking about, and to keep the crop clean early. And then, we move to other products as the season progresses.
So what makes glyphosate? I know I can say that word.
It is a difficult word.
What makes
glyphosate,
that specific chemical
such a buzzword?
But also what makes it potent? Why is it what we use to kill weeds?
Okay, so I know that I don't know the entire history of glyphosate, of Roundup, who it was originally patented by. I think Monsanto is looked at as an evil corporation or whatever, and they are a very powerful corporation that does, a lot of things in the food industry. I don't think they're inherently evil corporation or whatever. They, had the patent on it at one time. Then they were bought out by a larger corporation, Bayer, a German corporation, and along with that Roundup which the patent is off Roundup now, and there's a lot of generic suppliers, and there's other branded companies that brand their own product. They don't call it Roundup per se, or they all have their own funny name like Bullet, or I think I've seen all kinds of crazy names in the chemical world or whatever. They just have a name, but it's all that same salt. It's a salt, and the way that the process came about was, I don't know how it was found, but there was a geranium that was tolerant to that specific salt, and however the process of genetic modifications go, they took that geranium and crossed it, or spliced the gene onto first soybeans, and then from there we've gone into other Roundup crops, but they found that one geranium tolerant to Roundup, and from there it's just progressed. Now they have several crops that are tolerant to it. So, what's the advantage of it? It's a great grass killer. Grass are a humongous problem in crops, and before those gene edited crops, grass was taking a lot of our supply because just you can't keep it out of the field. And with Roundup, it's very effective in grass cannot stand it, and your crop remains in place, and it takes the grass out of the field. It takes it out of the equation, and you can produce more copious amounts of crops. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. So for anyone who hasn't listened to all the podcasts yet, we're not all about just like killing grass and taking it out of the soil and all that. So if you have questions about that, go listen to the other podcasts. We won't explain it all there. So yeah, like you use it to kill grass because it helps grow better crops. So you use it on soybeans. What other crops can you use it on?
Okay, so we can use it on corn, and then I'm pretty sure they have it on rice now, and I think canola and alfalfa, and there may be some more too that I'm not familiar with, but those are the ones that I know about that are, and I think cotton too now. So, I mean, there's several right here in our area that are, it's capable of using Roundup as your primary grass material, So, whenever we're applying any of these herbicides, they're expensive to apply for one thing, so we don't want to overapply them, and in the amount of volume per application, and we don't want to make very many applications. So every farmer is looking to limit the amount of applications he has in his or her field. Mm-hmm. We're not wanting to go out there every week and apply a thing of Roundup. At the end of the day, you're trying to make money. So the least applications you can make, the better.
Yeah.
So, I see both sides of the coin because I like health too. I don't want to feed my kids eat processed grains like oatmeal and cornflakes and all. I don't want to feed my kids that poison if that's what it is. So I can see, but I feed it to them, so I don't feel like that they're at risk from it. Do they need to eat an excessive amount of it? I don't know. I think you need to use moderation with anything, and take in good healthy foods, and but does eating a bowl of cereal in the morning, is it going to lead to cancer? And I really don't feel like it is.
Yeah. So it does Roundup cause cancer? Because obviously Monsanto was ton of lawsuits in the 90s after all the research.
Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yeah, you hear all the amount of farmers I've heard of who have died from cancer. Probably because of prolonged chemical exposure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
I mean, my family, has been affected by cancer, and on both sides, in a family of farmers. So, is it possible that it causes cancer? I assume that it's possible. I don't know though. I mean, there's a lot of things I think that cause cancer. I think if you are very healthy and you know the way you live and you live very clean life and you eat very healthy foods, then there's a lot less chance that you have things like that versus if you live an unhealthy life and you eat processed foods constantly and you eat sugar all the time and you choose not to drink water, and you choose not to exercise or spend time out in the outdoors, then your cancer rates are going to go up. Mm-hmm. I think also if you work in industrial facilities or,
Yeah.
I mean, all of those factors.
Yeah. I think prolonged exposure to anything typically artificial has some chance of causing
Sure.
cancer. Like, and also like we have to remember, and I've talked about this. I can't remember if I've talked about this on another podcast or not. But the amount of chemical that actually ends up in the tank of a sprayer is quite minimal compared to the 1,000 gallons of water it's all diluted to.
Yeah.
You're putting 5 to 30 gallons typically of chemical in something, and it's typically diluted a pretty high amount. Roundup is expensive.
Right.
A jug of Roundup is not cheap. You're
No, it's not.
dumping in 1,000-gallon sprayer load of Roundup on things.
No.
Prolonged exposure to anything like, concentrated Roundup. I mean, I know a guy, he used to work in the chemical field. You have to put full hazmat on to be around concentrated fluorine or fluoride. Fluoride is in every toothpaste. They add it into water now. Like,
yeah, we know
any sort of concentrate like that is going to have some adverse health effects.
Sure. I've most of my career I did all the 100% of the spraying around our farm, and from the time I was a young boy, really, and I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty healthy guy. I might die of cancer tomorrow, but I did. I get a checkup for my health, for my life insurance every year, and I've got the very highest rated. They can look at your blood and they can tell like within I think it's like a couple of weeks of when you're going to die or something. So, I mean, the life insurance company's got this stuff dialed in. They know when you're going to kick the bucket. They feel like I'm a healthy dude, and I've been around as many chemicals as anybody. And I've never been diligent about wearing gloves or, like I try not to just take a bath in the stuff, but, I don't wash my hands after I'm done, but a lot, I've been guilty of a lot of times, putting whatever in the mixing barrel and throwing it in the sprayer, and you're talking about rates, like a rate of Roundup would be 24 ounces an acre, so you would have somewhere around 20 gallons or a little over 20 gallons in a sprayer load.
Yeah, let's see, 24
and
ounces.
1,000 gallons of water.
24 ounces is what, half a liter of soda or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
When you're out there spraying, you're right. You're not just spraying like copious amounts of this liquid down. And a lot, when you boil it down to it, and you look at a lot of these labels on these chemicals, when you look, you have around 2 or 3% active ingredient, and the rest is inert. It's water blended with that salt is basically what you have when you have glyphosate. So, of that 24 ounces, 2 or 3% is active salt, and the rest is just inert. Mm-hmm. So, am I sitting here saying it's the most healthy thing? No. I mean, it's a chemical, But also, I think we got to take it into consideration. What's the alternative if we went back when we have 7.2 billion people here on Earth to feed? And we say it was just taken off the market tomorrow, and we can only produce maybe I'm just shooting a shotgun here. I don't really know if we could produce half of what we were able to produce with Roundup. How many more people would die of starvation than would die of glyphosate poisoning? Mm-hmm. And I'm also, like you think about this, like all those people that are in areas under starvation, if they were offered things like wheat or rice or corn that was produced with Roundup, would they eat it or wouldn't they? Well, of course they would, because they're hungry. It's easy for us that are well fed and have anything we want at Amazon or at the grocery, and sit here and say that we don't want to eat glyphosate produced food. But for the people that just need sustenance, you know.
Yeah. Oh man, 100%. It's like someone, the saying, get off your high horse. It's like, if you were, a lord or a king in the olden days, you're riding a horse around looking at your peasants saying like, why, why are you doing it this way? Why are you doing it that way? When they're really the ones paying your taxes. It's like, well, you're not being very considerate. Like, obviously they're serving you, but like, there's no need to like be a jerk about it. And so, yeah, I think it's easy to be on a high horse and say, well, we want it this way, we want it this way. We talked about that a ton last week. Is like, we have to, there's got to be some sort of ownership there. It's really easy to point the finger and say, why did they grow our food that way? It's like, because you're not growing your food. Like, there's a reason they're growing it that way. Is because they're trying to feed you and 1,000 other people by themselves. It's like, you're not. Yeah,
I mean, would we all want to eat totally nutritious food all the time? Yeah, but a whole lot more people would have to go to work, and they need to start tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just like if you want super nutritious food, it takes. We've talked about this on one podcast a couple of one or two ago, where it just takes lots of labor to produce nutritious food. So.
Yeah, it's hard, and I was thinking the other day, I was like, what would happen? I was thinking like, what would happen if the internet just like stopped working like tomorrow? I was like, well, I'd be out of a job, because my entire job is producing content for the internet. It's like, okay, I'd be out of a job, but I'd probably be able to go get a job helping produce food somewhere if it like really came down to it. Like, all right, I could go do that. I was like, man, like the world went just absolutely crazy. Internet goes down, World War III happens, we end up in a zombie apocalypse style scenario. It's like, how many people are willing to like actually go grow their food? And like, we're like, it could be an absolute shock to so many people. It's like, oh shoot, like this is a lot of work. This is really hard. Like, wait, weeds are a problem? Like, I have to fight weeds now to like survive? Like, I think people forget it's like fighting weeds is something that,
they're relentless. Like here, especially here in Kentucky during the summer. I mean, you can go out and hoe your garden one day, and you go back the next day, and there's just as many started that day as there was the day before. And it's something that you cannot leave them for a day, because if you do, it can overwhelm the crop, and it will absolutely take the crop, and then it'll ruin the crop, and you won't have any crop.
Yeah, and it literally happens in hours. Like, if you pulled a lawn chair out and sat and watched weeds grow, like by the end of the day, you would see new weeds pop.
Unbelievable. I mean, like, God, when He made those weeds to compete with, other things on the earth, they're trying to outgrow whatever's around them, outcompete. They're competitors. So if you have a crop of whatever type growing in the field, and you have a weed growing beside it, that thing is designed to outcompete that crop.
Yeah.
And it will do it.
And it's also typically designed to take the nutrients that plant needs.
Yeah, it's going to try to take its sunlight, and it's going to try to take its water, and it's going to try to take all its elements.
Exactly.
And choke whatever thing. I mean, it can be another weed beside it. It's going to try to outcompete that weed. And this is a super cool thing about plants, is whenever they get in really tight-knit communities, they will actually try to outcompete each other by growing faster. So the more things you put in and the crop is going to try to outgrow the weed too. He just can't successfully do it. But the more plants you put in a smaller area, the faster each plant grows. So, and they already grow. If they're out by themselves, that's a fast growing. It can grow from a tiny little seedling to a complete mature plant in just a season. So these are amazing. Amazing creations, these plants, and how fast they can go from just a tiny little seed to a complete mature plant bearing more seeds, in the course of 3 months.
Which is why, like, so, you, especially farmers who farm organic or have transitioned to organic or are transitioning. Like, there are guys out there, you drive by the fields and you're like, okay, they're probably transitioning to using less chemical, or this is, or it comes out of like CRP or cropland or something like that. CRP stands for Crop Reserve Program. For those of you who don't know, the government pays you to not farm your land in case we ever needed to grow more food. Anyways, this whole thing, there's a bunch of controversy. That could be another topic for another day. But it takes years to stamp out weeds. Years. Like, you drive by some fields and it's just weeds all over the place. And it's like they probably try to get them best they can, but they'll have to kill them this year. And next year they're going to have more pop up. And, it's like you don't get on top of it right away. If you cannot get on top of it when you start, then you are going to be fighting that for years to come to get it back where you need to. Because they're an invasive species. It's like the hogs down in Texas. Like, one's gonna bear 10 more, and those 10 are gonna bear 10 more, and in 5 years you have thousands upon thousands of different creatures running around. It's wild.
It is. It's like that Palmer amaranth or whatever, it's come out of that desert, in the desert Southwest. It originated there, and it's made its way all the way across the United States, and it's extremely competitive here in Kentucky, and one weed, bears millions of other weeds. So you try to keep those out of the field, but just one, and then you got problems. So weeds are, they are a ongoing problem in organic, in conventional, like people that are using pesticides, they're still battling weeds. It's just, you use all methods to keep them out of your field because they are extremely detrimental to growing food.
What did we do? What did we do before? What did nature do before we turned the vast swaths of U.S. land into farm ground? Obviously.
Well, they were, most of our prairies were covered by either forest or savanna, which is like a intermingling of like groves of trees with grassland underneath, or they were like a lot of these, like here in Kentucky, in this county, we're prairie. We didn't have many trees. The cattle farmers, they kind of started fencing the land after the early 1800s. And, trees started to pop up along their fence rows and stuff. But before that...
Wait, you're telling me that we didn't chop down every tree in the U.S.?
Oh, that's amazing.
It's a joke.
I know. But yeah, you even find people living around here that thought that this was, here in Ballard County, this was forested land. And I always tell people, I'm like, if you're from around the center, our Baptist church is right in the center of town. And it used to actually be at Hazelwood, where our farm is, and it was moved to the center, to the foot of Broadway there. But they took a picture of that church in every direction in 1901, and you know what? There was not a tree on the horizon.
Yeah.
Only grass. You could see a road running north and south, and no trees.
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget that because, some people, fence rows, a tree that could never survive before now has a nice place where it's not going to get chopped down by animals or things like that. And then people came in, they said, well, I would like trees around my house, or I would like a windbreak. Cows, you also want windbreaks. So I know lots of people who, even in the past 20 years, have planted trees just purely as a windbreak for their house or their cows. Yeah. So you look across all this, like so much of the U.S. was vast plains or savannas, where the country was not just covered in forests, and we did not come in and just chop down every tree in the U.S. so we could farm it. We did that in some places, don't get me wrong. There are places where, Iowa used to have a lot more trees, and I know a lot of people have cleared trees to make more room for farm ground, but that's not everywhere. There's some, Yeah,
and there's places in Kentucky that started out as grassland, transitioned to trees with cattle, and just with not being used and not being tended by the Native Americans that were living here and burning the prairies. They transitioned to forest, and then then the farming boom happens, and they're cut back out of forest and they're put in what I guess that would be a semi-prairie. If there's a grass crop like corn or wheat growing out there, it's still a grass. Mm-hmm. It's not a native species, it's one that we've brought in, but it's still a grass at the end of the day. It's basically doing the same thing that grass is doing.
Yeah.
So
We just have less animals to eat it all now.
That's right.
I've been listening to a book. I told Neil this earlier or yesterday. I've been listening to a book on the history of the American West, on how like it was like a 24-year span where basically cows showed up in the U.S., absolutely took over, went everywhere. People were just driving cattle all over the country. And then by the end of that 25-year mark, we saw a bunch of consolidation, government steps in, all this stuff. I'm still getting to that part. But anyways, we put up a bunch of barbed wire everywhere to keep cows in so farmers could just stay, farm their cows, sell their cows, same spot, instead of having to move them across the entire U.S., across different lands and different things like that. Super cool stuff. That'd be a fun series we could do in this podcast. Like
Yeah, that's neat.
U.S. farm history. Like that would be just seeing how our U.S. farmland has developed so much in the past even 150 years. Like, okay, we've gone from totally untouched to now one of the largest food producers in the entire world.
It's fascinating to me, and to look at all the old, just here in Kentucky, like, to look at all the old farm infrastructure that's around, and a lot of it is like, you can just see the remnants of it, because it's been so long now since the early days, but, you still see those basements with the barn on top and stuff, where they were loading stuff off wagon, and feed bunkers, and livestock is a thing of the past here pretty much. I mean, there's one or two cattle herds left here in the county, one dairy herd, and it's transitioned so much from what it was, like a cattle tobacco producer, to a corn and soybean and wheat producer. And just a short amount of time, really.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's pretty wild. So, back to pesticides. Okay, spray Roundup to kill weeds. That's good. Spray biologicals to help fertilize. Fungicide to prevent. Why do we spray fungicide? What is fungicide made out of?
Okay, so there's lots of different modes of action. So they're basically chemical compounds, and what they're doing is they're things like white mold, or in corn southern rust, or in corn anthracnose, which they're basically funguses. And what these compounds are doing is like copper is a curative in a plant, and you can apply copper sulfate to a plant to minimize the amount of fungus growing on it. But at some point, copper sulfate becomes toxic. Just like any element, you can only take so much of an element before it becomes toxic to us or to the plant. And so what these fungicides are is they're chemical compounds that are very similar to a copper makeup. And I'm not a chemist, but there's other compounds that prevent funguses from growing. So what you're doing is you're going out to a crop and applying a compound that is trying to prevent the fungus from growing on a crop. Well, why are we doing that? Because at the end of the day, when you get a fungus like southern rust on there, it can cut around 50% of the yield, or I've seen it as high as 60 or 70% if it gets really infected heavily, the yield off the plant. So what does that mean? Well, the yield of the plant, say the plant was going to produce 200 bushels per acre and it got southern rust in it. Maybe it would only produce 100, if the southern rust infection got bad enough. And it only takes a couple of weeks. So, what you're doing is you're taking and fungicide's an expensive application, especially a good one. You're talking 24, 25, all the way up to $40 an acre for a quality fungicide. So this is another thing that we're using on our plants, and we don't want to use excessive amounts, and we don't want to make any more applications than we have to. But what we're trying to do there is prevent yield loss. And at the end of the day, if a plant is growing healthy, the grain is more quality. And nobody wants to eat like a cracked, rotten, nasty looking. Everybody wants a clean, pretty grain. It makes a higher miller's quality than it would a grain that is diseased, and has a light test weight. And when you look at it, it's not pleasing to your eye, Mm-hmm. So there's reasons that all these things, we're just not listening to what the corporations are saying, and They're not. They produce these products at the request of farmers, not vice versa. I think people probably, I mean, I know everybody looks at corporations as inherently evil, but if there was no demand for that product, would they produce that product? No. So there's a use for these products, and they're not being used in excess. Everybody's trying to use them in moderation and to the best of their ability to create, the most food possible.
Yeah, like it's reducing application and input costs is a big deal. You want to be able to produce the most amount of crop on your acres with the lowest amount of inputs, because that's where farmers actually stay profitable, is when they didn't have to pay a ton to grow that acre of crops, but when they harvest it, they're able to harvest a good, healthy, plentiful crop. And so that's where a lot of the research is now moving in the field. Is okay, so we've been spraying for a long time, we've figured out how to spray well. John Deere basically just came out with a system that's going to reduce the application. It's going to reduce your application by like 80%.
That's called See and Spray.
That See and Spray, say what you will about John Deere, they're literally using cameras and very fancy computers and algorithms to just shoot the plant that needs to be shot. Still you're going to have fungicide applications and regular applications that are still going to be sprayed all across that, but reducing, glyphosate, whatever application, it's like, okay, well, rather than having to do a broad sweep over everything every time, it's like, okay, now we've got some weeds popping up, take it through. It's going to shoot that weed and it's going to kill that weed right there. And it's not going to be, you're first of all saving a ton of cost, but also you're reducing the application. You're only spraying what absolutely needs to be sprayed. And that's the big thing is, stuff like that being applied exactly when it needs to be applied, nothing more, nothing less. And from there, you're just kind of trying to manage. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
No, I agree. And I think, as technology increases, we may be able to look at some more, as you have, like, I saw, like, that Fierce Farming Organic, you see them on Instagram and on YouTube.
I need to go shoot with them. If you guys are listening to that, I am coming up still, I promise. I told you I would like 3 weeks ago. I promise I will come visit soon.
But it's interesting, they have like a laser weeder on their farm that's just, zapping the weed out there. It's cool to see them use that. And there's going to be all kinds of other innovations. I feel like, there's going to be things that are actually pulling weeds out there 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
So as those things become online and available, and the systems get ready for broad agriculture use, we may be able to increase our, ability to produce those labor-intensive crops through AI and automation, the stuff that the common person's not wanting to do every day, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we're moving into an age of where we're studying soil biology more than we ever been able to. Like the advancements in being able to study what's actually in our soil and what's actually in the dirt these days is like, I mean, it's been crazy.
It's a science.
In the past, 10 years, I've only been in this industry for about 5 now, but even in the past 5 that I was like, soil biology and all those micronutrients that, no one was talking about 10 years ago nearly the way they are now. People are now like, okay, we have the science. We're starting to understand this all more. We're moving into an age where, we're going to know way more about our soil. We're going to know what's helping this weed start, what's helping this weed grow, and probably, we're probably going to move into an age in the next probably 10, 15 years here. We're going to be able to stop weeds from even popping out of the ground just based on what all these things are happening. That's a crazy theory, but I don't think that's too far out where we're catching weeds before they even get the chance to leave.
Oh, I don't doubt it at all. I mean, the technology that they have coming on the farm now is amazing. Satellites that can look at the amount of crop growing in the field and estimate it, and they kinds of little startups that are looking at all these little intricate details of that have never been looked at before, and developing technology. So the possibilities are endless in this industry.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild few years. Do you think people look at corn crops now, we're growing so much corn, we're growing such big crops and all these things. And, there might be a day where we stop growing corn, but the day where the yield per plant is going to only keep increasing from years to come.
I totally agree. I think here in just the last year or two, you've seen major adoption of stuff like humic acids and, you know, other sugars and stuff like that are natural things produced by the earth, and reapplied, and you're boosting the biology of the soil, making the soil more healthy. In turn, the crop is more healthy. It only makes sense. The soil, the more healthy soil you have, the more crop it's going to produce, and the more quality of a crop it's going to produce too. So as you increase that output of the crop, the grain quality goes up too. So
yeah, I think I hear about that a lot is like, oh, we're producing so much food, it's lower nutrient quality, the soil has been destroyed. And while there is like elements of truth to that for sure, of like, yeah, our soil is probably a little less healthy than it used to be before we started doing stuff, and the crops might not be as nutritious as they were 100 years ago, just based on how big they are. But to say like, oh, how dare they? It's like, guys, there's people working on that. Like, it's not like people are like, oh yeah, like we're just gonna keep going and farm it into the ground, just destroy it. It's like, no, there's so many people who are like 10 years ahead of you who are already working on that sort of stuff.
I love my soul, and my whole career has been focused on that, on like making it better, not taking it backwards. I'm trying to make it better each and every year. I can't prevent a 10-inch rain from happening, but I can make sure that, all my waterways are covered in like a grass, and I cover crop, and some people don't cover crop, but they manage it other ways, with tillage or however they choose to manage it. They're managing their soil because they want their farm to be better. It's not like I think a lot of people get maybe the thought that, oh, the farmer's out there trying to I don't know that they think, well, he's destroying the soil, but they think, oh, he's growing a crop in the soil and it's taken away. I guess it is to a point, but he's managing to produce the healthiest crop he can produce and also protect his soil as well. He wants his soil to be there for future generations to be able to be as profitable as he was, on that acre. So, and he sure doesn't want it to be any worse the next year than he did the prior. Mm-hmm. And every year that I've been in this industry, I haven't seen many years when I've ever felt. I don't know that I can ever remember a time when I felt like we went backward, unless it was like a drought, which is out of your control. And, like even droughts nowadays, like we were in a drought season this season, and, is the crop down a little bit? Yes, but we're still producing, large amounts of grain from our area that was in a drought.
Yeah. So, and you're also trying to plan ahead and saying, I know drought will come again. Drought always comes and goes. I've never known anyone who says, yeah, there's not dry years here. There will be dry years. So you're also trying to plan ahead. It's like, all right, I want my soil, when a drought does come, to give this plant the best chance it can to still grow a healthy crop. And because that soil is really the main investment. It's like, okay, this dirt's going to be the same factor when it comes to a drought year or a rain year. So what can I do to make sure my dirt is as healthy as it can be? So when that dry year comes, it's still going to be helping the crop as much as possible.
That's for sure. In any drought, you want to be able to produce a crop even into a drought year. So you manage your soil to be able to produce even in the driest year, and I think, there's a large portion of farmers that have learned to manage it really effectively, and are growing a crop on. We don't have to here in Kentucky because we receive lots of rainfall, but there's lots of guys in the West that are growing a crop on less than 20 inches of annual rainfall a year and producing a successful quality crop. Hats off to them. Those guys are cutting a living from hardly where nothing's growing.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the places where it's like, all right, it's July, no more water for the rest of the year until it snows.
And they get a crop off.
Yeah. It's usually off a lot more land. That's how they're able to survive. Yeah, the 500-acre farms are a lot fewer out there than they are out here. But
yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much land to farm out there. I mean, the farmer just has to be big because who's going to farm it all?
Yeah, not enough people live there to do the job.
That's right. There's just not enough people to do it, so you're going to have humongous operations,
All right, well, we're going to call that good. We're at about 40-ish minutes. So we didn't get to desiccation today. What does it look like to desiccate wheat or soybeans? I know that is something that happens. I know very little about that. But.
I think 10 years ago, the desiccation of wheat was more popular than it is now. Wheat is managed here in Kentucky. A lot of times it's managed by variety, and people plant a shorter term variety and start harvesting on that and then allow it to mature naturally, because at the end of the day you have like a 2-day window when you're either going to damage your yield by spraying too early, or the wheat's already turned and it gets too late to do any good with the product and you just wasted your money out there. So it's not here in Kentucky it's not a common practice, or as common as it used to be. It's a lot of that maturity date on the product is
Sorry guys, my mic fell off, so promise it's okay. We'll just put it back on. We'll see how long it lasts. It happens sometimes. It's just screw tighter, right? That's always the answer.
All right, well, that's going to be all for today. We'll be back next week with another episode. So please share it with your friends. Continue to follow along. If you want to, you can leave us a review on one of the podcast apps. Apparently that helps it go up in ranking. So the more the merrier. Please feel free to also watch it on YouTube. We'd love for you guys to watch it on YouTube as well. You can watch us actually sit here and talk. I mean, it's not very interesting. We're just sitting here and talking, but if you want to see our faces and what we're doing, feel free to sit here, observe our body language, see how uncomfortable we still are with podcasting. But yeah, that's all.
It's fun though.
Yeah. Anything you gotta say?
No.
All right. Peace out.
Yeah. Like, share, subscribe.